everyone, welcome to Ask an Armourer. My name's Kia and today I'm going to be showing you how a reel works as well as how to diagnose some of the most common issues that I see in them. Now I am going to be using this flat Favero style one for my demonstration today, frankly as that's just what I have on hand here as well as what I'm most familiar with. However, the electronics will be the same in all of them, you just need to watch out for the orientation of this spring. So a reel is actually really quite simple electronically. It is basically just a really long body cord, épée body cord or floor cord that has the female plug rather than the male plug and is coiled around itself on a spring so that it can move back and forth. But essentially it is just three lines that need to connect correctly and make sure that there is no overlapping or cross wires anywhere inside of there. So repairs basically come down to, at least in the wire, just making sure that all of the wires are connected to the proper port and that they're generally in good shape. Now, the one thing that does make working on reels a little bit more complicated is the aforementioned spring. Now, if you're not careful when working on a reel, you could accidentally drop an end and the entire thing will unwind itself, which, while not difficult to deal with, is an annoyance that is now an additional problem to solve on top of whatever you were originally having to do. So whenever you're working on a reel, just be careful to make sure that the end is always braced so that there's no way for the reel spring to unwind itself. So the most common issues that I see with the reel, just like with the body cord, typically happen in the end attached closest to the fencer. This is the end that is most active and therefore will see the most amount of fatigue wear applied to it. So if ever there's a reel having issues, this is going to be one of the first places that I look. So as with any diagnosis, I'm going to start with a visual inspection. So first I'm going to look at this case called the clamshell sometimes, and that's just the plastic two pieces that house the end of the reel. So I'm just going to look at this, make sure there are no cracks, no missing chunks, and that in general this is in good shape, because that is what protects the wires both from damage as well as from just things like dust and dirt and everything like that that can interfere with the connection. While I'm at it, I'm also going to make sure that all of these nuts and bolts are present, because these are what actually support everything inside of it by holding the two halves of the clamshell together. And then I also want to make sure that both of these clips are present. This one is the one that makes sure that a fencer's body cord stays firmly inserted into the clip, and then this one is what actually holds it to the fencer so that all of that tension and strain is taken up by this, which is, as you can see, integrated into the structural part of the reel clip, as opposed to on this one, which is much weaker, and of course the pressure fit of the body cord into these plugs is simply not going to be enough in order to hold it on. So always make sure that both of those are there, they're very important. And then of course, and then the final element that I want to make sure there is this spring here, because this is what, when a reel cord is dropped, what will catch here and form that little bit of a stopping buffer. Obviously you don't want to just be casually dropping this whenever from wherever, because that will damage the wire inside. There's only so much this spring can do, but just for, you know, the last couple of inches when it dumps in there, it's fine. And then with all of this inspection, I'm going to make a note to myself if anything is missing. So if I see a crack or a chunk out of the clamshell, I'll know I need to replace at least that half. If any of the clips are missing, any of the screws, anything like that, I'll make a note to myself that when I go back in to do any repairs, that the replacing of those parts is going to be part of that. Alright, so if everything looks okay on the visual check, the next thing I'm going to do is a electronics check. And what I'm going to need for this is these two épée body cords that I'm using as stand-ins for floor cords. I like to do this just because it means that there's significantly less cord to wrangle around, so it's just a little bit easier. And then you need some sort of test box. I am going to be using my Favero one here, set to its reels and cables test setting. But if you have a homemade one, you could use that too, or you can use just a single multimeter. But keep in mind, if you do that, you're going to have to do one line at a time as opposed to doing all three at once, like my machine is capable of doing. But in any case, this is how I do it. So we're going to plug in the reel and cables as you would usually. So one to the back, and the other one right in front here. And so at first glance, I am showing just about 3 ohms throughout the entire system at a standstill. That's a good first setting point. We really want these to stay below 5 ohms across everything. I've also noted while I'm in here that all of the cables are connected to each other correctly. Nothing's gotten crossed over or is interfering with each other. However, we all know that reels don't just sit still like this, so we're going to need to do a little bit of stress testing. So in order to do that, I'm going to pull just a couple feet of wire out, and I am going to put in a loose overhand knot so it looks like this. You don't want to pull this tightly so that you don't put any stress on the wire, but this means when I release it, this wire or this knot will just sit here nicely and not allow the entire wire to retract and the spring to unwind everything on me while I do some of my tests. For diagnostics though, this isn't entirely necessary. I just find it makes life a little bit easier, so if you want to skip this step, go ahead and do so. So now I'm going to grab the end of my reel, which I am pretty certain has the issue because again, 95% of the issues I see in a reel come down to somewhere within this top section here. So looking at my display here to look for any sort of jumps or breaks at all, I'm going to just start bending my wire back and forth, rotate it around, pull on it gently, just anything that I can do to imitate the kinds of things that it would see while the fencer is using it. And so right now, the fact that my settings haven't changed at all, it's been rock solid, this is good. This means that the wire and the connections in here are in really good shape. So we can set aside the electronics check for now and move on to the final check. Now, the final check that I am going to do is to test the run ability of the wire. So basically this is just confirming that this plastic part right here, this little funnel that guides the wire in and out of the reel, is in good shape, as well as that the cable itself is long enough to actually be useful for us on piste. Obviously, you can imagine what would happen if a reel cable is too short, a fencer tries to do a flesh or something and ends up at the other side of the piste, and then just gets yanked backwards or breaks the reel if there's not enough play for them to be able to make it that far. So if you tied a knot, go ahead and untie it now and gently let the cable back in. That was out. And you're just going to take a look inside of this funnel here, as well as sort of pull on the wire a few times in a few different angles, and it's not catching on anything. This tells me that that funnel is still in good shape. Oftentimes what happens when this funnel has been used for several years is there is one area in particular that starts getting worn through just by the friction from the cable itself. You can imagine that's not great for the cable either. So if you do this and you start feeling any angle or anywhere that there is catching, I would suggest actually opening up the case of the reel in order to check this a little bit more closely. You may need to replace that one. I don't see that one super frequently because again it takes many years in order to get to that point, but it's always a good one to just keep in mind, especially if you're working with club equipment that just gets used a lot. Finally, I'm going to check the length of this, and so I'm going to rotate it so that the cable is coming out towards me. And this is a trick that I picked up from my sewing hobbies. This is something that will just provide you an estimate of length. Obviously, if you need to know exact length, you'll have to bust out the actual long ruler. But for most people, the measurement from their shoulder to the tips of their other hand is roughly 1 yard. you know, just slightly shorter than 1 meter. So again, it won't get you a super accurate measure, but if you can do this more than 15 times with the cable, the starting length of these is 20 meters, so anything above 15 is okay for practice, but you should probably keep an eye on it for tournaments. So let's get started and just see what this is. Alright, so here I have hit just above 18 poles. So this means I have lots of cable, and the entire time everything felt smooth and even in the tension, so this length is good to go. So now I'm just going to gently and slowly run this back in. And now our reels are checked. I know this one is happy, all the pieces are together and in good shape, the electronics are in good shape, and the cable itself inside is good shape. I am going to go wash my hands now because you can see a little bit of dust and grime that gets pulled into these just from their movement. And that's how I check a reel. So again, I've made any notes of any pieces or parts that need to be replaced at this point, from the cable to this funnel to anything in the end. And now I can set about repairing any issues that I found. I'll have more videos later on how to cover all of those fixes. So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or other topics you'd like me to cover, let me know down below. See you in the next one. Bye.